Okay, we're going to pick up here in the video C with the small intestines. They are about 6 meters long, so this is the largest part of the canal. And there's 4 processes: secretion, digestion, absorption, and propulsion. The cells are called enterocytes. They produce lots of enzymes, hormones, and mucus. The enzymes, along with those secreted by the pancreas, are responsible for the most all of chemical digestion. There's no further nutrient digestion that takes place by human enzymes once the food leaves the small intestine. The bacteria in the large intestine carry it out from here on after we leave the small intestine. Once the nutrients are chemically digested, they're absorbed across the enterocytes, either into the blood or the lymph, along with water and vitamins. The small intestine mixes and propels its contents along into the large intestine. So there's 3 different divisions. The duodenum, which is the very beginning part, meets at the pylorus. The jejunum, which is the middle part, is the most active place for chemical digestion and absorption. And then the ileum, and it's the final segment that meets the cecum, which is the first part of the large intestine. There is a valve. The ileocecal valve controls the movement of food from the small intestine to the large intestine. It also prevents the bacteria that live in the large intestine from flowing backward into the ileum. That's critical, preventing that access, keeping that bacteria where it needs to be. So the structure, the internal has some folds. They get progressively smaller. Most absorption takes place here because the folds increase the surface area. The largest ones are actually visible without a microscope. They're called circular folds. Folds also slow down the transmission of chyme into the small intestine. It gives those nutrients more time to be digested and absorbed. The other 2 are not visible. The villi and you have the villi are a little bit smaller. They're the in-between ones. They do have a layer of enterocytes that surround the blood capillaries and the lymphatic vessels at the area called the lacteal. Between the villi, you have intestinal crypts, and this is where your mucus-secreting goblet cells can be found. And then the smallest folds are your microvilli, and they form what we call the brush border. And the brush border basically is going to give a place where the enzymes can come in contact with the liquid chyme. It's going to be secreted. Those enzymes are produced and made by the enterocytes. They speed up the breaking down of disaccharides and peptides. Motility, small intestinal motility differs during fasting and eating. So during fasting, it's of course slow. It does have rhythmic contractions called the migrating motor complex. They just clear any remaining material. Requires about 2 hours to push food from the duodenum to that ileocecal valve. And it's controlled by a hormone called motilin. Now, there are 2 different types of movement that the small intestine undergoes: peristalsis and segmentation. Peristalsis is alternating contractions between your circular layer smooth muscle and your longitudinal smooth muscle. Primary goal here is to propel chyme toward the ileum, ultimately into the cecum through that valve. And then segmentation is called intestinal churning, and it's when you only contract the circular layers, basically a squeezing motion. Primary purpose here is mechanical digestion and to mix that chyme with the pancreatic enzymes as well as bile. This is where all the mixing needs to take place. And then that gets us to the large intestines, or the large bowel. They run along the border of the cavity. They surround the intestines and the other organs. About 1.5 meters. It's larger because of the diameter. It receives material from the small intestine that's not digested or absorbed, and it makes a passageway for feces to exit the body. It's pretty active in absorbing water and electrolytes for that homeostasis. The tasks are secretion, mainly mucus, propulsion, and defecation. It also houses some really important bacteria. They're going to help make some vitamins that we need. The anatomical regions, you have the cecum. That's the first part of the large intestine, called the blind pouch. It's located at the lower right quadrant of the abdomen. This is going to form a smaller pouch called the appendix. You've heard of the appendix before. The next and longest part is the ascending colon, or the colon. Now, the colon is divided into 4 different regions. The first is called the ascending colon. It travels superiorly along the right side of your abdomen. It makes a sharp left turn when it reaches the liver. We call this the hepatic flexure. At the hepatic flexure, the ascending becomes the transverse colon, and it passes transversely across the top of the abdominal cavity. At the spleen, it takes a sharp turn inferiorly or downward at the splenic flexure. The splenic flexure is going to give rise to the descending colon. It goes downward on the left side. And then in the left quadrant, you have the S-shaped sigmoid colon. And this is the last part of the colon, the 4th region there. The muscular externa of the large intestine is unique. Its longitudinal layer is not continuous through the whole thing. It gathers into 3 bands called the tenae colli, and their constant tension bunches the colon into pockets called haustra. The serosa here has flat pouches known as epiploic appendages. So there's some of that anatomy there. After the sigmoid colon, you have the rectum, and this portion runs to the sacrum and it's retroperineal. And this, of course, is going to store food that has to get into the anal canal. And the rectum leads into the anal canal, the last part of the large intestine. The walls feature some horizontal folds called rectal valves. They allow for the passage of flatus, which is gas, without risking passing feces at the same time. All right, here are some histological features. The mucosa of the large intestine lack villi, and the cells lack microvilli. These adaptations reflect the fact that nutrient absorption is not a primary function of the large intestine. The mucosa is rich with goblet cells, and it secretes a very protective and lubricating mucus here. Now, the large intestine has a ton of bacteria, 10 times more bacteria than any other cell in the body. And these bacteria, called normal flora or gut flora, there's about 500 different types of bacteria that coexist with humans in a symbiotic relationship. And here's what these bacteria do. They produce vitamins, vitamin K, which is necessary for blood to clot. They metabolize undigested materials, things that are unable to be digested. They deter growth of harmful bacteria, so they prevent the growth of pathogenic organisms. They also kill other harmful bacteria. And then they stimulate the immune system. During infancy, normal flora induce immune tolerance to their own antigens. They also stimulate malt to produce antibodies to pathogens. So very, very important immune system functions as well. Now, the large intestine has 2 segments, the proximal large intestine and the distal. The proximal is the primary site of water and electrolyte absorption and bacterial activity. And then the distal performs a small amount of absorption, mainly just water, but its main role is to store fecal matter until it's ready to be expelled. The 2 types of motility in the proximal segment are segmentation, churning, that circular muscle of the haustrum contracts and swirls things around. This, again, aids in the water absorption, triggered by stretch reflexes. And then the other in the proximal large intestine is mass movements. And this is when multiple haustra undergo peristalsis and it propels contents toward the distal large intestine. Happens about 3 to 4 times a day. It's usually triggered by food consumption, and it's a reflex controlled by the ENS. And then the distal large intestine is much less motile. When mass movements for fecal matter into the empty rectum, that's of course going to initiate the defecation reflex, which is going to empty the contents of the rectum. So here's a summary of the alimentary canal. This is a great chart to study for your exam. It shows the organ, it gives the structural properties, and it gives the functional roles. So this is basically these PowerPoint slides in one nice little handy chart. So strongly encourage you to use that. That completes the large intestine. We'll pick up with the accessory organs in the next video.